Welcome back to Health by God's Design. This session is session 5, and we're going to be talking about one of the 6 pillars. It's actually the second pillar, called emotional fortitude. And so in this session, what I really want to cover is the ties between what we believe in our heart, what we think with our mind, with what we feel emotionally, and what happens to our body physically. A lot of times, I've talked about this before, how the body is often categorized as just the physical body, no ties to your emotions. So physical health is one category of its own. Emotional health is often labeled as a totally other category, and spiritual health, a category over here. And when we have a problem with one of them, we don't see them as tied together. We see them as very isolated. And so it actually drives a lot of bad methods of trying to correct the body, because we're not seeing it as a problem from its root. And now, just as a preface, I want to make sure this is clear. There are problems with the physical body, like a physical trauma. If you got beat up, if you got in a car accident, if you broke a leg, something like that, that's a category of its own. That doesn't have to do with anything going on from the heart, a wellspring of the heart. It's literally just you had a physical encounter that was stronger than your body's ability to resist it. If you get stabbed, if you cut yourself, it's not because of bad behavior, but it's also not tied the same way. The stuff I'm talking about are chronic health problems. And we're going to start to see how chronic health problems are very deeply rooted in emotional health problems. And the way we're going to be exploring that is to really explore what it means to have emotional fortitude. So when we talked about the 6 pillars of health in session 2, we covered how emotional fortitude was experiencing the full range of human emotion. So sometimes when we feel overwhelmed, we actually lock our hearts up and we stop emoting in certain ways. There's times for grieving and mourning, and there's times also for celebration. We are really designed to be able to experience all of it, but there's healthy and right ways to do it and unhealthy ways as well. But emotional fortitude is also being a disciplined person. And that just means being able to be steadfast and move forward regardless of whatever's going on around you. And it's also the ability to harness stressors for personal growth. So you will face adversity, but instead of just seeing it as resisting things that are challenging and tough, it's actually being able to grow in light of them, in the presence of them. And so it's kind of like, the way I would sum it up is having emotional fortitude is being tough as nails with a wide open heart. Okay, so you're not closed off to anything, but you can handle a huge amount of even adversity. And so I wanted to tell you, like, the textbook definition, the Merriam-Webster's definition of fortitude is strength of mind that enables a person to encounter danger or bear pain or adversity with courage. That's the Webster's dictionary. And so I like this word so much. That's why I used it when we talked about emotional health. I thought, how much better would it be to not just be able to handle it or just be less stressed out, but to actually have courage and strength of mind in the midst of adversity and pain and trial. That is the kind of strength and health I'm talking about. And I want to really help you understand how it works and really how to get there and how to steward that well. Because if you steward your emotional health well by becoming a person who has strong emotional fortitude, then you're actually going to experience better physical health and mental health because of it. Everything in your body will actually work better and heal better because of your ability to do that. So when we don't have emotional fortitude, what happens is we end up succumbing to a lot of pressures and stressors that we encounter through our lives. We cave to fear much more easily, and we end up vulnerable to influences that can derail our life. And so having these skills are a key And even understanding how it works and how to manage some of this is such a key to making sure your life is built on solid ground. In Proverbs 25:28, this is actually from the New King James Version. There's this great verse that says, He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down without walls. And I like the King James because it says the rule over your own spirit. Some versions only say temper, but the King James actually says rule over your spirit. And what that really means is if you have the ability to govern your emotions, regardless of your situation, you end up like a city with walls who's not been overrun. But when that's failed and when all these outside pressures start to affect you, derail you, and end up controlling you, you are totally open to influence that you don't want. And it even gives room for the enemy to start to get a foothold in your life and even a stronghold in your life where you feel bound by what's wrong instead of being free to live out the righteousness that Jesus actually gives you from the inside out through his Holy Spirit. So really the keystone to understanding all this is this, that the emotional health is rooted in our responses to stress and adversity. It's not our ability to manage the stressor itself. And one of the best examples I can give you is gravity. So gravity is a constant stressor. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't like you or dislike you. And if you have a bad day, it doesn't say, hey, Kathy, I see you're having a bad day. Let me turn gravity down a little bit for you. Now, gravity just pulls. It pulls constantly, and it doesn't really care how you feel. And so the idea behind that is if you want to spend all your time trying to manage gravity, you're going to be wasting your life. But if you can harness the stressor of gravity, you can end up becoming very physically fit by using it for exercise. And you can end up with a great strong posture by standing up tall against the pull of gravity and end up with a very healthy body, not by resisting the stressor, not by trying to manage the stressor, but harnessing the stressor for good. And so there's a lot of examples that we're going to be covering today that will help you get an idea of how to do that. But the best way to see how this works is actually to map it through the brain. And the best way to understand how to do that, like actually see this map, is we're going to unpack and explore the emotional brain in detail. So we're going to get a little scientific today, and I'm going to pull a lot of stuff from some textbooks, and we're going to build a brain map so you can start to see how this emotional brain actually works inside the body. So emotions and the brain. Your brain is a complex organism. It is designed to control and change the way the body works, but it's very dependent on input into the brain. And I'm going to unpack that so you really understand the system, but think of the brain as a very adaptive organ. It doesn't just control the body, but it responds to the body's needs. So the brain is highly responsive in the same way people have the choice to be very responsive. Let me explain a little bit more about how this works. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by unpacking the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, I pulled this quote, and we're actually going to be pulling a few quotes, so we're reading it right out of anatomy and physiology books. The reason why I'm pulling it out of anatomy and physiology books is because I want you to see that these texts are typical texts that a doctor, a nurse, healthcare provider will read. But so little of the industry understands the connections between body, mind, and spirit. And when we hear body, mind, and spirit, we often think of holistic or sometimes even new age thinking. When I explore it this way, I think you're going to start to see that it is very, very overlapped. So this is from Human Anatomy and Physiology. It's a very basic anatomy textbook that's used in undergrad, like pre-med kind of courses, Rarely will you see this one used in grad schools because usually you're using a more complex text by then. So it says this about the autonomic nervous system. Although all body systems contribute, the relative stability of our internal environment depends largely on the orchestrations of the autonomic nervous system, the system of motor neurons that innervates the smooth and cardiac muscles and glands. At every moment, signals flood from the visceral organs into the central nervous system, and autonomic nerves make adjustments as necessary to ensure optimal support for body activities. Now, just to clarify what that's saying, because this is, again, assuming you know a lot of this language, it's saying that the autonomic nervous system controls the smooth muscles, which are all your internal organs, your cardiac muscle, which is your heart, and then the glands of your body, so your entire endocrine system. And then it says, at every moment, signals flood from the visceral organs to the central nervous system, and autonomic nerves make adjustments as necessary to ensure optimal support of body's activities. This is the adaptation I was talking about. So if we continue, it says, in response to changing conditions, the autonomic nervous system shunts blood to more needy areas, speeds or slows heart and respiratory, adjusts blood pressure and body temperature, and increases or decreases stomach secretions. Most of this fine-tuning occurs without our conscious awareness or attention. For instance, few of us realize when our pupils dilate or our arteries constrict. And so this autonomic nervous system is a keystone for understanding the changes in our body that go on a daily basis. You have heart rate go up, heart rate go down, blood pressure go up, blood pressure go down, blood flow to the brain or less blood flow to the brain, digestion of your food, having to pee, poop, balance hormones, everything is really regulated by this autonomic nervous system. And autonomic just means automatic. So anything that you will function when you sleep is part of the autonomic nervous system. Anything that you can do without thinking about it would be a part of this too. Even stuff like your posture muscles. You don't often think about it, but you're sitting up probably right now and you're engaging posture muscles without conscious effort. You're not thinking about it. It's actually because the posture muscles and the whole posture system is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So that gives you a good idea of what we're talking about here. Now, it's broken up into two main, what we call divisions. It's more like a tone scale, and I'll explain that in a second, but let's explain it in divisions first. So the parasympathetic division is most active in non-stressful situations. This division, sometimes called the resting and digesting system, is chiefly concerned with keeping the body energy use as low as possible, even as it directs vital housekeeping activities like digestion and elimination of feces and urine. So a lot of the just basic maintenance of your body is all in the parasympathetic division. There's two other things that aren't listed here, and that's your ability to heal and your immune system are both really part of the parasympathetic division. So when your body is operating in a parasympathetic tone, you'll have all of these main activities going on. A good way of thinking of it is it's like resting on a beach. Okay, when you're resting on a beach, there's not a worry in the world. You are totally relaxed. That's when your body would be full-blown parasympathetic. Okay, it's like taking a nap in a hammock on a warm summer day when the rain's not even coming. Okay. Now, we're building out what we call this tone scale, which will be very helpful because we're going to differentiate certain encounters that we have, like stressful situations, and talk about it according to this tone scale, just different things in our life that we encounter. So parasympathetic, rest and digest. Let's talk about sympathetic real quick. So the sympathetic division is often referred to as the fight or flight system. Its activity is evident when we are excited to find ourselves in emergency or threatening situations, such as being frightened by street toughs late at night. This is an old book. Nobody says street toughs anymore. A pounding heart, rapid deep breathing, cold, sweaty skin, and dilated eye pupils are sure signs of the of the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is really in control of your survival in the most extreme of threatening situations. And there's different ranges that we can encounter with this, and I'll explain the ranges in a second, but think of it in extreme form. If you were in full-blown sympathetic, you are ready to bolt out the door or fight whatever's in front of you, holding absolutely nothing back like your life depended on it, okay? And you've probably encountered that before. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, breathing goes up, your skin gets cold, your muscles get tight, your pupils dilate. All of that is part of fight or flight. A good example is it's like if you were attacked by a bear, right? You would be literally fighting for your survival or running as fast as you possibly can. So that is the sympathetic or fight or flight system on this tone scale. Now, we have to go a little bit deeper in the brain, and I'm going to build a little bit of a visual map so we don't get lost because we're introducing a lot of new terms here. So the hypothalamus is a part of the brain. It's the emotional part of the cerebrum, this is still from Human Anatomy and Physiology. It's the basic book. It says this about the hypothalamus. The emotional part of the cerebrum has strong links to the hypothalamus. In fact, it is the emotional part of the limbic lobe to danger and stress that signals the hypothalamus to activate the sympathetic system to fight or flight status. Thus, the hypothalamus serves as the keystone of the emotional visceral brain, and it is through its centers that emotions influence autonomic nervous system functioning and behavior. Now, this is huge. We're going to build this out. So the hypothalamus is inside the brain. It's in the emotional part of the brain. It's strongly connected to other parts of the cerebrum, and we're going to talk about which ones. But the thing I want you to take away from this is that the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that tells your body to act in fight or flight or rest and digest. Okay? The hypothalamus is actually what sets the tone of the body. So something has to trigger the hypothalamus to initiate either fight or flight or rest and digest. And that part of the brain is called the limbic system. And then we're going to explore, it actually goes a little deeper, and it's called the amygdala. So first, the limbic system. We're switching books here. So we're going from clinical neurology, which is a little bit more complex, but I thought they had a really good description of the limbic system in here. It says the limbic system has been called the visceral brain and has close autonomic and functional links with the hypothalamus. Various portions of the limbic system exert control over visceral manifestations of emotion and drives, such as sexual behavior. Stimulation of limbic system areas elicit autonomic reactions, such as cardiovascular and gastrointestinal responses, so heart rate and digestion, micturition, which is peeing, defecation, which is pooping, piloerection, which is fevering, or temperature change in your body, and pupillary changes. These erections are channeled in large part through the hypothalamus. So what it's saying is that the limbic system, it has extremely close links to the hypothalamus, and the limbic system is your emotional brain. And so your emotional brain, because it's so closely linked, it changes or it stimulates the change of tone in the body, which will change things like heart rate, digestion, peeing, pooping, fevering or temperature change, pupillary changes. All of that actually is directly controlled by the hypothalamus, but influenced which tone it's going to be by the limbic system, the emotional brain. Okay? So the amygdala and the hypothalamus have very close relationships. The amygdala specifically is the part of the limbic system that really is linked here. So it says this: because of interconnections with the sensory association cortex and hypothalamus, it has been suggested that the amygdala plays an important role in establishing associations between sensory inputs and various affective states. Activity of neurons with the amygdala is increased during states of apprehension, for example, in response to frightening stimulus. The amygdala also appears to participate in regulating endocrine activity, which is your hormones, sexual activity, and food and water intake, possibly by modulating hypothalamic activity. And so the word modulating in that sense means it influences it one way or another. So modulation isn't total control. The hypothalamus is already doing something. Modulation either will move it one way or move it the other way. It's a very neurological term, but it's helpful to understand that. So basically what it's saying, I love the part that's bolded there. The amygdala plays an important role in establishing associations between sensory input and various affective states. And the affective states are fight or flight, or rest and digest. So we have 5 main physical senses. It's what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, and what we smell. These 5 senses all, I usually have arrows there, but all of those will send input into the amygdala. And once you see something, hear something, touch something, smell something, or taste something, it will give you, or it will change the emotional response to it based on what it is. So when we see something really peaceful or hear beautiful music, it will often put our amygdala into a very restful state, very peaceful state, and peace will, internal peace will actually change the hypothalamus to make sure we are operating in rest and digest. So we actually digest better, sleep better, relax more, and our heart rate and blood pressure will actually go down from hearing things like beautiful classical music. If we see a scary person who's running at us, then we will probably respond a little bit more naturally with a fear response. Fear is going to be an emotional response that will tell the hypothalamus to activate the body into fight or flight. Okay. So this is the importance of the autonomic nervous system. Now, this quote, this is actually from a biologist. He's a bit new agey, but his book was very interesting. I'm just being really honest with it. But he's such a brilliant biologist, and his associations of understanding how emotions and health work together by what we believe and our health work together, it was brilliant. So I wanted to show you this. Our responses to environmental stimuli are indeed controlled by perceptions, but not all of our learned perceptions are accurate. Not all snakes are dangerous. Yes, perception controls biology, but as we've seen, these perceptions can be true or false. Therefore, we would be more accurate to refer to these controlling perceptions as beliefs. Okay, and I think he just nailed it by saying it this way, especially as we're starting to look at how physical health and emotional health are so intimately tied, because he saw emotional responses to environmental stimuli, which are our senses, what we can perceive with our senses. He distinguished the difference between what's true and what's not. And I love that he said it's your perception. One of the things we talked about in session 3, we talked about identity in Christ. When you have a perception that you're guilty, right, you will respond guarded, because your guilt, it becomes shameful. So we end up in guilt, condemnation, and shame. When we can rightly perceive that if we've repented from any sin that we have in our life, then our perception is that we are not guilty, like we read in Romans 8. And that perception is true in Christ. And because of that, we can have peace with God and peace with others, and a hope for a future, which means we live in internal peace. So one puts us into a category of shame and even fear, because it ends up being the fear of death that controls us, because that is the consequence of sin, and that's what we're resting under. But freedom in Christ is knowing that we are totally clean, right with God, and we can live at peace. And so the perception of the gospel even can change our entire emotional world. And because of that, it starts to change even the way our body is behaving, our physical body. So what I did is, in this chart, our beliefs are almost like a shielded filter to our amygdala. So I may believe something to be true. Like he was giving an example of like if I see a snake, I'm scared, but not all snakes are even dangerous. So just because I see one, if my emotional response to every snake is fear of death, then I'm actually inappropriately responding, because not all snakes are capable of even killing you. So if I believe all snakes are that way, I will respond to fear every time I see a snake. If I believe that some snakes are very dangerous, some are very benign, then I can inquire as to what snake is in front of me and actually discern, is this dangerous or is it not? And what's my appropriate response to it? I respond differently, and even my body is responding differently. I'm either responding in this fight or flight, fear, or parasympathetic. I could be totally at rest, even though there's a snake there. So in summary, the sympathetic nervous system, or the fight or flight system, is meant for acute stressors. Okay, that's a really big takeaway. It's meant for short-term problems, right? Like if some building is about to fall on you, to have a heightened heart rate and like a legitimate acknowledgement of the fact that that building is probably about to kill you if you don't move, then to go into fight or flight is not saying, you have something wrong with you. It's literally meant for your survival. It's the flight part. Run out of the way. And you have all this extra adrenaline and extra a surge of energy and the ability to actually carry out incredible tasks because of that. So the sympathetic nervous system does a few key things in our body to help us survive those acute stressors, those short-term encounters, like if a bear attacked you, if a building was going to fall on you, or like a car accident, which has nothing to do with person to person. It's just an accident. So what happens is we end up with increased stress hormone. We end up with increased muscle tone. So stress hormone is going to be adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Increased muscle tone. Our muscles get really tight and activated so that we can use them very rapidly. Your heart rate definitely goes up. Your blood pressure definitely goes up. And the main reason it does is to provide more oxygen to the big muscles that you're going to be using to either fight or run, okay? You have increased reflex responses. So your reflexes go through the roof in fight or flight. And part of what helps do that is the increased adrenaline. The adrenaline actually is one of the main drivers of most of these changes. So we get a surge of adrenaline when we end up in fight or flight. And then we also increase energy expenditure. That means we burn up a lot of our stored energy, but it actually eats away at our reserves. So if you end up in a very high stress or high fear scenario, you'll end up exhausted afterwards because your energy is literally sapped out of your body. The other things that happen is it decreases your immune system response. So you actually don't fight off illness as easily. It decreases digestion. It decreases absorption of that food that you're digesting. It decreases excretion, so you don't pee or poop as much. You'll actually retain a lot more. And it decreases your healing responses and your cognitive function. So you don't think as well. Basically, if you're being attacked by a bear, it's not the time to do algebra. And even if you tried, you would do a very poor job. But once the fear goes away, you can think clearer and problem solve again. So cognitive function, critical thinking is not necessary to survive a short-term scenario. Okay? It just doesn't help. Let me give you an example of this tone scale so you can understand how this works, because it's not like there's a light switch with an on and off. It's more like a dimmer switch, okay? Sympathetic tone is fight or flight. That means you're full-blown in survival mode, not thinking very well, totally highly reactive, quick reflexes, high blood pressure, high heart rate. Everything is for that. So if you were in full-blown sympathetic, it'd be like a bear attacking you, okay? A little bit below that is you see the bear, but the bear doesn't see you, but you're close enough that if he did see you, you are in danger. So you're almost there, but you can still think because you're not in the middle of the fight. This is bear hiding. So bear is totally preoccupied doing something for himself, but it's still a bear. So, I mean, if I saw a live bear, I'm going to be like, okay, I want to make sure my running shoes are on and laced tight. If the bear was sick, this is less of a threat. The bear is actually occupied with something that's disabling him. So I'm probably not thinking the bear is going to attack me, but then again, it's still a bear. So I'm not going to take my chances. If you see a bear in the distance, you can acknowledge it's there, but just go a different way, not think anything of it. You're definitely going to be lower in this tone scale, closer to rest and digest. But again, you're around a bear and you know that a bear has the capability of literally mauling you. Uh-oh. If you were to hike in the woods, you're just going for a beautiful hike. You know that there are bears somewhere in the woods. But you're nowhere near it. You don't see one. You're mostly relaxed, but you have a little bit of an awareness of the fact that this is the woods where the bears live. And so you're going to be alert enough to just look around and mildly ready to respond. But if you were just resting on the beach, you're in total rest and digest. There are no bears on a tropical island, so you are safe. Okay, and I'm just using a bear in all the examples in this particular one, but there's a lot of other things that cause stressors. So what are some of the things that cause a sympathetic tone in everyday life? I'm sure you can think of some, but I'll just give a few examples and you can probably think of some more for yourself. Let's say you had an angry boss that was yelling at you. Would you be in fight or flight, or could you be at rest and digest? Right? Depends on you, but different things stress people out different ways. What about this one? Oh, a ton of work with more work on the way, more than you can handle. High stress, maybe low, right? Piles of work, no end in sight. How about this one? Come home and the kids are painting on the walls. That one sometimes gets people. A lot of stress with that one for parents, especially when that happens very often, or if you just did remodeling like I'm doing right now and have plenty of marks on it already. What about a flat tire? For some people, this stresses them out. For other people, it's more like if you ever saw the movie Christmas Story, where he gets a flat tire and he just gets excited because he gets to get timed again about how fast he's going to go. So different people will have different responses to different encounters, right? So a flat tire for some people, it's like full-blown fight or flight, like day is over, it's totally ruined, gonna be late for work, probably gonna get fired, everything is running through your head. And other people are just like, flat tire, I'm just gonna change it and get on my way as fast as I can. What about traffic? Being stuck in traffic like that, especially when you have somewhere to go. I mean, this is This one gets me sometimes, and sometimes I just have to pray and calm myself down and realize that I am just trying to get from point A to point B, and I can't control the world. I can control my responses to what's happening. This one's interesting. So dogs, right? For some people, they see just a dog, right? A nice dog like this, and it will actually cause a sympathetic response. Other people will see a bulldog and the bulldog will do it, but a lab or something like that won't cause a sympathetic tone. And a lot of that has to do with your prior encounters. So what I've found is a lot of people that have been attacked by a dog before have a very hard time being around dogs because they still remember being attacked. And so it could be a Chihuahua. It could be like the smallest, most benign dog ever. But because it's categorically a dog, they're still responding in fear because they've let fear rule their responses. And that's a really good example of, like in Proverbs 25:28, he that has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down and without walls. It's like you let fear in once, but because you accepted that fear, maybe you were scared for a moment, but you accepted it as I should be afraid. You start to believe I should be afraid of dogs. It breaks down those walls, and now fear comes in every time you see a dog. This one is very interesting. So combat for soldiers. Right, I've been around people where like a loud boom will happen when no one's expecting it, and a bunch of people duck. And there's also a number of people that don't. Usually the people that don't are like veterans. They've been around explosions. They know how to decipher which explosions are dangerous, which are not. So there's very little response because they've been trained to rapidly filter what they see, what they hear, what they smell, and understand the scenario based on their senses. And that's part of training. So two soldiers can go into the same exact battle, but depending on their internal emotional fortitude and their training level, two people in the same scenario, the same battle, can come out of that scenario and be totally different in their responses. One could end up in total fight or flight, really stuck there, ending up in PTSD. The other person could go home and cook a couple burgers and not even think anything of it. And that really has to do with the difference in the level of fortitude, okay? Emotional fortitude. And this is where we start to distinguish how the encounters we have in our life and the senses, the sensory inputs that we engage in or that we encounter, how that determines how we respond emotionally and then end up acting or behaving or functioning physically. Okay, so somebody that has PTSD actually has a lot of breakdown of a lot of their normal health functions. So a lot of those people end up on a lot of drugs. One of the most common things I've heard with PTSD survivors is unclear thinking, so loss of cognitive function, and really poor digestion actually is very common. And if you think about it, it's because when you're in a sympathetic tone, when you're in fight or flight, you do not need to digest food when you're trying to survive a bear attack. You can digest the food later. So the energy from your internal organs is diverted towards your muscle function so that you can fight or run successfully. Okay, this one threw everybody for a loop, coronavirus. Huge fear response from the whole world, right? Some people didn't. I mean, I could tell you, I went in every store without a mask. I wasn't worried about it. I thought the whole thing was ridiculous. Now, I don't want to downplay this. What I thought was absurd about it is that we thought that responding in fear would help us fight the virus better, but responding in fear actually drove our immune systems to be constantly compromised because we constantly feared everything around us. So it created a counterintuitive change in our physical body, because when you're in fight or flight, it lowers your healing rate and it lowers your immune response. And so the fear of the world actually created the compromise of the immune system of the nations. Like, I wish this was more clearly understood, because the news companies used fear tactics to drive behavior, like masking up and getting vaccines. But the fear response also leaves you highly vulnerable to exposure and damage from the virus. And so a lot of people ended up getting very sick. And I'm firmly convinced that if we responded with confidence and boldness and wise stewardship of our health instead, we would have wiped this thing out without all the protective mechanisms. And even the most vulnerable among us would have fared much, much better because of our response. So I hope you're starting to see that we actually, based on our responses, we almost create our destiny through our emotional response, and it's based on our belief. So one of the things that happens is, I want to give you an example, basically. I want to give you an example of how one physical sense can break down the immune response. And I'm sorry, I want to give you an example of how one physical sense can cause the brain to go into this fight or flight status, which compromises our health. So I'm going to use actually brain communication. So we're going to be talking about neurological clarity next session. We're just going to go over this lightly today. But the brain talks to the body and the body talks to the brain, and it's all through these nerve signals that run up and down the spinal cord and out the nerves to communicate. So think of it like wires running through your body to the supercomputer of your brain. Now, when your upper neck gets misaligned, so we have your skull on top, your atlas is your first joint in your spine, and then your axis is the second. When that gets misaligned, it actually causes an uneven stretching of the muscles of the upper neck. It also affects the joint capsules and even the discs of the spine. Now, all of these structures, the muscles, the joints, and the discs, all have these nerves called proprioceptors. Now, proprioceptors are little signals that tell the brain where your body is in space. And so there's proprioception coming from your entire body. So information about where your joints are, how much muscle tension is on each muscle, it's all going to your brain. And it goes up to an area first called the cerebellum. The cerebellum is on the backside of your brain. And the cerebellum actually has connections to what's called the vestibular nucleus. Now, the vestibular nucleus is the balance and posture command center of the body. So it controls the posture of your body. When the vestibular nucleus gets compromised or affected in any way, it actually sends signals to the muscle spindles of your spine, and it affects your leg length balance because it will cause an imbalance in the muscle tone of your spine. So your low back will become uneven. One side gets a lot tighter than the other, and it changes the position of the hips. And so from the proprioceptors, it goes up to the cerebellum. The cerebellum also sends projections, nerve connections to the thalamus. The thalamus is closely related and connected to the hypothalamus. Now remember, the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that tells the body to either operate in fight or flight or rest and digest. So when you end up with improper proprioceptive signals, it sends signals up through the cerebellum and the thalamus to the hypothalamus and actually causes the hypothalamus to direct your body to operate in fight or flight status. And so naturally what's going to happen is because the hypothalamus it also includes hormone regulation. It will send information to the pituitary gland, which controls most of the hormones, and cause a hormonal imbalance. So a lot of hormonal imbalance can actually be caused just by one sensory input, proprioception, which is not one of your five senses. It's actually one of the other five that you have internally. But that physical sense being sent upward to the emotional center of the brain, the hypothalamus, will actually cause hormone problems. So you can have a misalignment of a joint in your upper neck causing a wrong input into the brain, and the output of it is your whole endocrine system gets out of whack. So as the physical senses come in, they're filtered through the belief. So based on your belief, which doesn't have anything to do with proprioception, it can affect the amygdala with fear, peace, rest, joy, whatever, and that will set the tone of the hypothalamus, which sends it either down parasympathetic or sympathetic tone. Okay. Now, when it comes to something like proprioception, it has nothing to do with your belief. So there are physical reasons why you can be set in a fight or flight tone that have nothing at all to do with what you believe. So that means it would be a physical sense going straight into the amygdala and the hypothalamus, or even directly to the hypothalamus. And that will set the tone when something's wrong inside the body. Now, we are going to talk about a couple things in the body, right? You can have a chemical imbalance from chemical toxicity that can also change the way your brain's functioning and change your emotional brain. That's why one of the 6 pillars is chemical purity. You need to have a chemically pure body for this to work right. So the hypothalamus also sends information to the brainstem, which activates the sympathetic nerves, and it controls the organs, the blood vessels, immune organs, and muscle tone. It's everything we already talked about, but I'm just showing you how this whole thing is deeply connected, okay? So all in all, one input, proprioception, can have this huge loop up through the brain and back down to control the way the body's working and send your organs into a resting state where you don't digest food, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your internal organs do not work right, your immune system gets compromised, your muscles get tight, your healing rate goes down, all because of one sensory input. You have more than one sense. So you're constantly getting bombed with sensory inputs that determine how your body's operating, rest and digest, or fight or flight. So the question is, how do you change the tone, right? How do you get away from the bear? And the reason why I'm using the bear is that's the first example I used. But if we're trying to get away from the bear, get away from the stressor, there's a couple things that we can do. I love the promises of God, right? This is one powerful one. 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Very, very important, because we need to remember those promises, and it gives us peace in very stressful situations. Now, sometimes we're just overreacting to things. So one of the best things we can do is just chill out. And you need to be honest with yourself. And that's where mental acuity comes in, is honesty, accurately assessing yourself. Sometimes you just need to chill out because you're the one overreacting. Sometimes we just need to have some fun. Fun is such a great gift from God, to just be able to relax, laugh, do something enjoyable. And a lot of times what seemed like a big thing becomes very, very small because we have a chance to get a perspective. Go on a retreat. I love retreats, actually, because retreats take you out of your everyday scenario. And a good retreat is really designed to help you learn something, grow in some way, overcome something. So in a retreat, you're actually You are escaping what you're doing, but the point of it is not just to run away. The point is actually to get a right perspective and then be able to go back into everyday life and be able to be more fruitful in your life. So there's marriage retreats. So if marriage is stressing you out, a lot of times you go away, totally new environment, someone else has the agenda, but they're helping you sort through things together to strengthen your marriage. There's other retreats that are like just personal retreats where you go to relax, or growth retreats where you're trying to grow personally. There's all sorts of examples of that. But often what happens is when we re-engage or re-encounter the same situation that we were encountering before, we are equipped with a new and right perspective and the tools to be able to engage. And so we don't actually end up in that fight or flight response. And it preserves our emotional health. We end up growing in emotional fortitude. And because we're responding more peacefully, our health is actually maintained. So retreats are powerful. They really help change a lot of things. Take a vacation. There are times where just getting away is what you need. And when you go back, a lot of times your perspective is a little bit clearer because you're not in the mess of everything. You come back and you can think a lot sharper. Think differently about your situation. Again, it's just about perspective. Sometimes you just need to let it go. This is really powerful, especially if you struggle with trying to be too controlling and you're trying to control things that are actually totally not yours to control. That will lead to so much stress and even this fear and anxiety response. And so one of the healthiest things we can do when we realize something is stressing us out and creating anxiety in our life, but it's actually not ours to handle, is to truly let it go. Give it to God. Totally let it outside of your grasp, because that's what's going to give you peace. And then in some very rare scenarios, I would suggest quitting. And the only reason why is because you're doing something that you were not called to do. So if that's the case, quitting is what will lead to peace because you are constantly engaging something you aren't created for. But in general, I think that striving and working hard and being consistent is extremely important. I want to reference one more person, new person. Her name is Candace Pert. She's a professor at the Center for Molecular and Behavioral Neuroscience at Rutgers University. So, smart lady. She said this: our research shows that our emotions are intimately connected with our entire physiology of the body. The chemical processes that mediate emotion occur not only within our brains, but also at many sites throughout the body. In fact, on the very surfaces of every single cell. Now, this is such a powerful quote, or a statement actually, because she's basically saying that even though there is wiring, there is neurological connections that connect our emotions to the effect of our physical body, she's actually saying that emotional changes actually affect us at a cellular level through our whole body. That it's impossible for us to respond emotionally without it directly affecting our physical function. So physical health is intimately tied with our emotional health and the level of emotional fortitude we operate with. And then back to one more quote from Bruce Lipton in The Biology of Belief. He said, redistributing the viscera's blood to the limbs in the fight or flight response results in an inhibition of growth-related functions. Without the blood's nourishment, the visceral organs cannot function properly. The visceral organs are just our internal organs. The visceral organs stop doing their life-sustaining work of digestion, absorption, excretion, and other functions that provide for the growth of the cells and the production of the body's energy reserve. Hence, the stress response, being stressed out or in fear, it inhibits growth processes and further compromises the body's survival by interfering with the generation of vital energy reserves. Basically, he's saying you can't be in growth and defense at the same time. You can't be stressed and defensive, fearful and overwhelmed, and also be growing and flourishing and nourished at the same time. And I really wanted to drive this home, that you can't be in defense, right, against the threat, in fear, and have an open heart at the same time either. Okay? Very important. So how do we live? How are we called to live? That is the big, big question. So there's two main things that I've found, and I encourage people constantly to do, and that's to remember the names of God and to remember the promises of God. These become such an anchor in our lives when we encounter these challenging situations that we are bound to encounter. But some of the names of God that bring so much peace is, Jehovah Rapha. He's the Lord that heals. So when we're sick and when we're hurting, to put our faith in the Lord and to stand firm in the fact that he's the one that brings healing to our body. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. So when we feel anxious, he is our peace, not the situation. It's so easy to just pray and say, God, please change the situation, instead of saying, God, you are Jehovah Shalom. You are peace. And when I'm with you, I am at peace. I am filled with peace and I'm overflowing with peace. Yes, the situation is hard. Lord, you are the one that can change the things I can't control and I can't change, but I rest in your peace. You're Jehovah Shalom, right? Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide whenever we're stressed out, that we don't have enough, that we're lacking money, that the bills are tight, that we have big repairs to do and not enough savings to handle it. Or even thinking about like inheritance for children, that he's Jehovah Jireh. He is the provider, right? He is. And so when we pray, it's not just God, give me stuff. It's God, when I'm with you, I have all the provision of heaven because I'm your child. I am a rightful heir of the full inheritance you give your children. So when you're Jehovah Shalom, I am provided for and I do not need to worry. And it's amazing how many times he'll show up and provide, because he is the one that provides. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is there. Sometimes we just feel alone. We feel like we've been abandoned. We feel like we've been rejected. We feel alone. We could be in a room full of people and we feel totally isolated. But he's Jehovah Shammah. The Lord is there. And so we can start praying and just be like, I may feel alone, but you are Jehovah Shammah. You are there. I do not have to doubt that you are with me. He's the King of Kings. He has authority over all. Everything is in his hands. It doesn't negate our personal responsibility, because he never, ever violates free will. But these are things that we can stand in. And the promises of God are so powerful that he'll go before you, that he is your shield. That in Matthew 28:20, he says, and never forget that I am with you every day, even to the completion of this age, that he will not abandon us. But just understand that with the promises of God and even his absolute authority, there are criteria for his promises to be fulfilled. Some of them are absolute and some of them are based on criteria. And so he's faithful, but some of the conditions need to be met. For example, if he says, if you do not forgive your brother, then I will not forgive you. He says, if you deny me, Jesus said, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father. Part of the reason why we end up driven in anxiety and stress is we're not walking in that absolute bold faith. The one that says it doesn't matter what the situation is. It doesn't matter who's looking. It doesn't matter who may scrutinize me, hurt me, even kill me. I will walk in the ways of the Lord. And when you do that, the promises, you start to see them. The promises of the miraculous start to become real. I've seen so many in my own life, but it was always when I walked in obedience, when I submitted myself to him, and when I said, I don't care what anybody thinks, I'm going to believe what you said. that's when I started to see these things come true. And that's when I started being filled with boldness and peace on a regular basis. Okay. But sometimes we do end up in turmoil, stress and fear, because we've given the enemy a foothold and then even a stronghold. And when that happens, we end up being tormented. Repentance is actually the key to changing the heart. And so when we recognize those areas in our life where we're not standing firm on the promises, we're not believing it, we're not walking in his ways, that's actually where we get a lot of the room for these situations that we encounter to stress us out. And it becomes prolonged because it becomes a prolonged belief. And so when we encounter financial struggles, when we encounter challenges in our family or in our marriage, when we encounter situations with our work, when we encounter legitimate persecution, we end up actually just going to fear as our safety and defensiveness as our safety, but we don't realize that we're walling in the fear that's driving us down into the ground. And so my greatest encouragement in this, and I may actually make a couple extra follow-up videos to just really unpack some of the biblical side of this now that we went over emotional fortitude, is that walking in this means you have to walk with no compromise. You have to walk with no excuses. And you just have to use truth as the filter. And so when God says something is true, it doesn't matter what the situation is, filter the situation through the truth of his word. Believe with all of your heart. Belief is literally the filter in which we perceive those things around us with our physical senses and even with our heart. And it becomes the filter of our heart and the beginning of healing for your body, because when we can see all things through the promises of God, through his faithfulness, and through the life we can expect when we walk with him, then it actually allows, just like we showed with the emotional brain, it allows us to live in a perpetual rest and digest, which maximizes the healing of our body. It maximizes the digestion of our food, the absorption of that food to nourish us. It maximizes our immune response to fight off any illness. It maximizes our clarity of mind so that we can start thinking well. And we get to live in that at all times because we don't succumb to fear, stress, and anxiety. So that's emotional fortitude, to have a right perspective, to filter through our situations, to live in constant peace, which brings health to our physical body. So I'll see you in the next session where we're going to be unpacking neurological clarity and its intricacies on how it affects the function of our physical body from the inside out.